Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Pernille Ripp, and I am the founder of the Global Read Aloud. And I am so incredibly honored to be with author extraordinaire Zetta Elliott. Of course, she wrote the incredible Dragons in a Bag series that many of you have been loving. I first fell in love with Zetta's work when I read the picture book Bird, which I use quite a bit with my seventh graders. But every time Zetta comes out with a new book, I feel like I discover a new aspect of the world. She invites us in with curiosity and wonderings and reminds us of what humanity really looks like. So if this was your first time with Zetta, aren't you lucky? And also, how lucky are you that this is a series, which I know many of you made many comments about. And there was even a little bit of anger with why she was ending it after a trilogy. So, welcome, Zetta.
Thank you so much, Pernille. What a lovely introduction. Oh my goodness.
Your work has been a part of my life for a long time. So, yeah.
Wow, that
So,
is
this
so
is a
wonderful to
joy.
know to know that someone is following my evolution as an author. I'm so glad my books are useful in your classroom.
Well, and I just think about their broad appeal. And I will say, like, when I saw you came out with Dragons in a Bag in 2018, right away I was like, okay, I need to read this because it could be a global read aloud book. And I just sat with it for the longest time of just like, how incredible would this be to be a part of this project? I remember when I first read about the book coming out, and you kept coming back to this idea of we don't see Black kids as heroes in our fantasy stories. And I was just reading another interview with you as well, where you talked about, cities are often used as kind of the dark places and not magical. And that led me into a little bit more of a rabbit hole of like, but wait, aren't you from New York? And it turns out I'm super wrong. You are not from New York at all, even though it's like an adopted home city. And I wonder if some of our kids even know this. Do you want to share just a little bit of your origin story as far as where you're from? Because there were some questions about that as well.
Absolutely. Wow. So over the course of our conversation, I'm sure some people at least will hear my accent. And I have an accent because I'm an immigrant and I'm so proud to be an immigrant. My father was also an immigrant. He left the Caribbean when he was a teenager, an island called Nevis, and he moved to Canada. And he met my mother in Toronto, but he also came to the United States to attend high school and college in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So my father always, like I didn't hear him speak with a Caribbean accent. He felt very American to me. And then he ended up moving back to the United States. And when I graduated from college, he said, "Would you like to come down and visit me in Brooklyn, New York?" And he had taken us to Brooklyn when I was really young, when I was probably 6 years old. And that was kind of a really exciting, but also a kind of a scary experience. My grandmother got mugged right in front of our house, like some kind of, it was dramatic. Let me put it that way. It was dramatic. But when I came back after college, I just fell in love. And I know some people have remarked upon that. If you're from Brooklyn and you're reading Dragons in a Bag, you can kind of tell that I love the city. And I just write about everywhere I live. I haven't written a whole lot about Toronto, Canada. I've lived here longer than I lived in Canada. I just became a US citizen. I'm really looking forward to being able to vote. And right now I live in Chicago, Illinois, the Windy City, and book 3, The Witch's Apprentice, which comes out in January, is set in Chicago. So it was really exciting to me to sort of be here as an outsider, as someone who was learning about a new place and seeing the city through Jackson's eyes. And I hope that kids in Chicago get really excited about all the landmarks that they will recognize. And I hope kids everywhere else will be interested and want to learn about a new place. I think New York, like I said, when I went to New York the first time, it was a little scary. I didn't grow up in a big city. I'd never been on a subway. Like, there were a lot of new experiences. But it does frustrate me that cities get represented as a place that kids should want to escape from. And I think magic can happen to anyone, anywhere. So wherever you live, there's always the potential for magic as long as you believe it can happen.
The perfect segue to one of the questions from Moran's class out of Woolwich, Maine. They wanted to know, do you believe in magic and do you believe in dragons?
Oh, yes, and definitely. Let's see. Do I believe in magic? You know, the funny thing is, as an adult, when people would say to me, "Oh, you should read this fantasy novel," for a few years, I was probably in graduate school in my 20s, I would say, "Oh, I don't read fantasy. I don't read those books about trolls and fairies." And then I started thinking about what I read as a child. And almost all of it was books about fairies and trolls and dragons. I absolutely love magic because for me, magic isn't just about wonder and fairy dust. I mean, magic is definitely about a world that's possible, a world that maybe doesn't reveal itself to everyone. So there's something not exactly secretive about magic, but you have to figure out how to access it. And I think when I was growing up in Toronto, I often felt invisible and not in a magical way, in a really kind of sad and lonely way. And that was one of the reasons I left. And I never believed anything magical could happen to me in Toronto, which is unfortunate. I did have one experience that I can remember down on the shore of Lake Ontario. But other than that, I just really thought this is a boring, plain, sad, invisible life, and things will be so much better in New York. And then, sure enough, because I arrived in Brooklyn believing something special was going to happen to me, special things did happen to me. And I remember one time I was in Prospect Park and I was sitting by the lake, and two swans got out of the water and just came and sat down next to me. And I was like, is this actually happening? And people were freaking out and taking pictures, but I just thought, you know, that's the kind of magical thing that can happen in Brooklyn on a weekday after I go for a run and then sit by the water. And so a lot of the things that I write take place in Prospect Park, including Dragons in a Bag. There are lampposts there that remind me of Narnia. Like, I don't know, I think so many of the stories I read as a child, which were magical stories, magical carpets and unicorns and fairies, they still linger in my imagination. And I can look at the gnarled roots of a tree and start thinking about The Hobbit. And then next thing I know, I've gone down a hole and my imagination is racing and I'm thinking up a new story. So I definitely believe in magic. I have never personally seen a dragon, but that does not mean they don't exist. I do carry four tiny dragons in a mint tin in my bag right there. Uh, and that was sort of the idea for dragons in a bag. And I have stuffed dragons and I have glass dragons and I have a dragon on the wall over there. And yeah, I like having dragons around me. I kind of think dragons are misunderstood. You know, I think someone else told stories about them that they were mean and awful and greedy, and I just think we could tell some new stories to redeem their reputation.
And so one of the questions, right, that comes up, of course, I'm sure an author is like, how did you become an author? But as I was reading more about you, and I know other students kind of talked about it too, you talked about how you wrote a lot as a child. But then where did the leap come as an adult? Because it was clear from what you were saying that it wasn't like, oh, I wrote since I was a child, and then it was just this natural flow into authorship.
Yeah.
But like, so
Oh,
what was it that finally said, you know what, I have a voice that deserves to be heard by others, and I have something to share? Like, was there a moment in time, or did it just happen gradually?
well, I have to say that writing was just something I enjoyed doing. And even before I was writing stories, which I only did for school, really, before I was writing stories, I was a storyteller. And a lot of people come from communities and cultures where storytelling is oral, right? You don't have to write anything down. You can just start telling a story. And I found that when my parents got divorced and I moved to a new school, I could stand in the schoolyard, and if I told a really good story, I could have a group of people gathered around me. And if it was a really good story, I could hold their attention and then they would want more. So I think storytelling was a way of creating community. It was a way of not feeling alone. But when I started to write, that was something I could do without anybody else's help. And so the first thing I wanted to do was to be a tennis player. And I soon realized that to be a professional tennis player, your parents have to drive you to all your games and you have to have a lot of support and a lot of equipment and money. So that dream fell by the wayside. But writing, I didn't need anybody else's help. And I was so lucky to have an English teacher. I suspect every writer has had an English teacher somewhere who said, You are special. You have a gift. You can do something easily that might be hard for other people. And for me, it was Nancy Vickert. She unfortunately passed away just recently, but we stayed in touch most of my adult life. And she was the one who took me aside and said, if you want to be a writer, you will be. And I said, you don't just decide. And she said, of course you do. And I don't think that's presented to children often enough. I don't think we understand that writing is a profession. It's a job. You can train to be a writer, but you can also just make writing a daily practice. And that was what she said to me, said, if you want to be a writer, you write every day. So that was when I started to develop a daily writing practice. In college, I was mostly writing essays, but I wrote for the college newspapers. So I was a little interested in narrative nonfiction. I went to graduate school and I was studying literature. I love to read. I love fiction. I love historical fiction. I love fantasy fiction. And I was learning more about the authors who wrote those books. And I just thought, I want to be like them. I want to be part of that community. Again, that idea that if you tell a good enough story, it gains you admission to a community, not a club, right? It's not like a select private club that only certain people get to join. It's just that when you start telling your story, it puts you in conversation with people who are also telling stories. And so I would say I decided when I was like 13 or 14 that I wanted to be a writer. And then when I got to Brooklyn, when I was probably around 21 or 22, 23, I started graduate school, and all the friends that I met there were writers. And they would just say, oh, I'm a writer. And I would say, oh, what have you published? And they're like, oh, I'm not published. And I didn't think you were allowed to say you were a writer if you weren't published. But of course you are, because a writer is someone who writes. So if you're writing, you're a writer. And so I held on to that identity until I still hold on to that identity. I can't always sell the things that I publish. I can't always make money off of them, but I'm still glad to be writing. Writing is like breathing for me.
So you mentioned the four dragons in your mint tin in your bag. What came first? The name, the dragons, the story? How did dragons in a bag? And there's a follow-up question.
Uh-oh.
I know, and now I got to find it in my highlighted. Oh, it was because it was so good. It was. Did you already know that it was going to be a trilogy when you started to write it? Like, was
That's
that already planned out?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So Dragons in a Bag, the series has 5 books. So I just finished book 4, The Enchanted Bridge, and I turned that in. So that will come out in 2023. And then the 5th book, The War of the Witches. I don't have a contract for that yet, but Random House has said they are interested. So fingers crossed, there will be a 5th book. So what happened first was that I run in Prospect Park. And for those of you that don't know about Prospect Park, New York City has a big park right in the middle of it called Central Park. And then Brooklyn is a borough of New York City. There are 5 boroughs, and Brooklyn has a big park in the middle of it, which is Prospect Park. And every time I would go for a run, I would pass through the main entryway, which had 2 guardhouses. And I always thought it would be so amazing if you could get inside the guardhouse. But not only is it locked, there's no doorknob. Like, there's just no way to get inside, and the window is blocked up. But it sort of looked like a castle. And I am a total medieval geek. I love everything to do with the Middle Ages. And so I just thought to myself, I could probably write a really cool story about a kid getting inside one of those guardhouses. And then separately, my friend Marie, who lives in Philadelphia, she sent me a gift of 4 tiny plastic dragons. And she wrote me a little note. And for some of you, hopefully you're not watching Game of Thrones, but your parents might have watched that show. And there was a character on there who had 3 dragons that she raised from being babies to being full size. And my friend joked that I would make a much better mother of dragons. And I thought, she's absolutely right, I would. But she also said, maybe this would inspire you to write something. So for a long time, I just had these tiny little dragons, and I thought, I really want to carry them with me, but they're tiny and I don't want to lose them. What can I do with them? And I happened to have a mint tin in my bag, and I just dumped the mints out and I put the dragons inside along with Marie's note. and I carried it in my bag, and I just thought, Dragons in a Bag. That's a cool title. But it's not about a writer who's walking around with dragons. It would be a witch. And one of the things I love about fantasy is that when you read a lot of fantasy fiction, you start to recognize the conventions, right? You start to recognize that there are patterns and there are characters and there are kind of formulas that repeat over and over and over again. So sometimes you see a story and before it even unfolds, you have a clear sense of what probably is going to happen. And what I try to do with my fantasy fiction is to upset people's expectations. So anytime someone says, "Oh, you wrote a book about a witch," chances are they're thinking about an unattractive woman with a big nose and a wart on the end of it, and her skin is green, and she's wearing a pointy black hat, and she's got a broom and a black cat. And I just was like, that's not who my witch is. You know, my witch is a tall black woman, elderly woman who walks with a cane, and she's got a big white afro, and she lives in Brooklyn, you know. So I think people maybe open the book with a certain set of expectations, and then I can meet some of those, but I can also upset some of them. And maybe that'll lead to different expectations, and we won't have this one fixed image of a witch. We'll start to think about women who have magical powers in a different kind of way.
I'm so excited to hear that it's not a trilogy. And I can tell you from the questions that were submitted, as will a lot of children, because there were some pretty like angry, like, why are you not writing a fourth book? You should stop everything else and write a fourth book. And I just love that. So, haha, there will be 5. Shivani from Cumming, Georgia, Shiloh Point, wanted to know if you were a character in this book, who would you be and why? And maybe combine that with Courtney's question from Woolwich Central in Woolwich, Maine. Are you going to include yourself in one of the books? So you have kind of 2 options. Either you're in it or who do
Very
you right.
interesting. I like those questions. I have to say, there is a little bit of me in every book I write. So it may be that a character has a background similar to mine. I have to say that I really identify with Kenny because Kenny's in The Dragon Thief. Oh, so maybe if you haven't read the sequel, you won't know about that. But Kenny's coming up. He's a new character in the sequel, and his parents are divorced. And after his parents get divorced, his mom experiences depression, and she's sort of stays home a lot and watches a lot of TV and just is very sad. And I remember that from when my parents got divorced. And then Kenny is really mad at his father because his father got remarried and started another family elsewhere and hasn't been paying much attention to Kenny. And I remember that experience too. But Kenny still loves his dad and misses his dad. So I identify with Kenny, but probably Kavi. Kavi is probably someone that I can relate to because I am a younger sister. And I think younger sisters, especially when you are the youngest in the family, A, you get treated like a baby when you're not. B, you want to hang out with your older siblings and they don't want to hang out with you. And they think you're a pest and they make you feel like you're not really wanted and you have nothing to contribute. I think that's really a big part of my writing characters is that I don't like it. I don't personally like being underestimated. And I think I grew up as a Black girl constantly being underestimated. And nobody looked at me and thought, oh, she should be the lead actor in our play, or she should be the singer, the soloist in the choir, or, she should be in the gifted and talented program. And it made me work so hard. I had to work that much harder to get people's attention and to say, guess what? I'm really smart. Guess what? I can sing. Guess what? If you give me a chance to do this, I can contribute something significant. So on the one hand, I think there's a little bit of me in Jax because I think he's a geography whiz and he's a little nerdy, and I am definitely a little nerdy. But I'm not ashamed of being, good at school and interested in castles and dragons and fairies. But I think really, Jax, he's doing everything he can to support his mom, but the truth is he misses his dad. And so he turns to an elder for support. And I was very close to my grandmothers and my grandfather. I have about 3 or 4 different grandmothers, and I was close to them, and they were not cranky like Ma, but they definitely gave me a lot of support at times in my life where I couldn't talk to my parents. And so I think that aspect of Jax's relationship with Ma, I really relate to.
And there was some broad conversation in the global read aloud community where some teachers were kind of like, well, I can't read this aloud in regard to how Ma spoke to Jackson. And others were like, well, why not? Why are we so quick? One, to make it bigger than it is, but also to shield children from the realities of some lives, right? Like it was this idea of like, well, children's books should always be good and always show positive relationships. And it's like, well, just because she speaks this way doesn't mean she doesn't love him. So how do you react when people are kind of like, why did you do it that way? Why didn't you just make her this sweet, loving, mom who didn't have this pushback personality or whatever?
Yeah, that's really funny. I think that's definitely a cultural difference because I think within the Black community, the way that Ma talks, the fact that she's a little bit gruff, would not be considered necessarily problematic. I think elders are allowed to be how elders are. At least in my family and growing up, you take what you get and you show respect and you don't talk back and you show no sass. But I think also, I mean, you have to invest in the characters. I think people talk a lot about world building and they think that that's the key to fantasy fiction. I think for me, because I'm largely writing about a realistic world, it's really the relationships and the characters that are my top priority. So if I'm opening up the book, my editor thought we should take out the first chapter because the first chapter of the book has an eviction. And, the staff at Random House, they thought that might be too sad for children. And I was just like, didn't Harry Potter's parents die like in the opening chapter? I mean, fantasy fiction has a lot of grim content, and that's part of the appeal of those books is that magic is going to be introduced, and because magic is power, a character is going to be given the potential to resolve some of these problems. So the fact that Jax is, potentially facing eviction. His mother has to leave him with a stranger. All of those things create, I think, dramatic tension. And then the fact that Ma doesn't want him to come in, we later find out that she's got this job to do and she doesn't want to have, a pesky little kid running around. So she didn't give Jax a chance. He didn't give her a chance at first. But when they do, that's when they start to sort of relate more to one another, be more honest with each other, which is the key to building trust in a relationship. I mean, I was following the Dragon Pals 21 Twitter chat, and they were saying, I can't believe all of that happened in one day. And that was really important to me, right? And that is a trope within fantasy fiction, just sort of throw people together who don't know each other and make it so that they have to rely on each other, that they come to care about one another. And then they're going to have a relationship that can move forward and sustain them through other challenges, which of course they are going to face throughout the rest of the series. So I think it's realistic. I think it's reasonable even to look at Ma as a character and think, oh, she's gruff, she's brusque. What does she mean? Go get me a beer. Like, all of that is deliberate, and it's worth it to talk to kids and be like, how would you feel if an older person spoke to you that way? And how would you want to respond? But also the question is why, right? Why would she speak to him that way? Is she really just mean and nasty? I think that's something I'm trying to do with all of the characters. So by the time you get to the sequel, you're going to meet Blue. And it's funny that we're working on having the series made into a film or a television show. And one of the things that producers always say is, well, who's the villain? And they want you to identify a clear villain. And I'm like, as you move through the series, there are so many people you really can't tell if they're entirely bad or entirely good. A lot of it is contextual. A lot of it is the situation. A lot of it is giving people a chance to prove themselves. And I think that's what I'm trying to do with the characters in this series.
But I think that you do that so well too, because you're writing fantasy that is set in the real world. And I think with you wanting and fighting for that eviction scene to still be in the book and fighting for the different relationship changes and demeanors, it again proves to kids your life doesn't have to be perfect for you to be the hero, right? Like for magic to come in. And I think that that's also what's so appealing about the book, that this is a character that many kids can see themselves in or connect to, and that doesn't mean that they don't get to be the hero of their own story. And I think that that's and I just and I what I love is that you were able to do it in a way that was accessible to so many kids at young ages. And that's one of my favorite things about you is that you never dumb it down. Like you always just bring it to a point where kids can understand it, and once again show kids like look at what you can do and look at what you can relate to. So we're almost out of time. So there's some quick questions. Raymond Leong from Markham, Ontario, Canada,
Ooh.
wanted to know, do you play World of Warcraft? Is that why Leroy Jenkins is in the story?
That's so interesting. I do not play any video games.
So apparently there's a connection there. We'll have to find
Okay,
out.
I'll take their word for it.
Right. Persephone Lund from Lindenhurst, Illinois, wanted to know, do you love writing or do you just like writing?
I absolutely love writing. I remember meeting one of my favorite authors several years ago, and she said to me that writing a novel was excruciating. And I couldn't believe it. I just thought it hurts, like it's painful, because I would absolutely never write another novel again if it was painful. I have so much fun writing. I mean, if magic is power, then writing is magical because I get to decide everything. I pick people's names, what they wear, what they look like, where they're going to go, what they say to each other. When I was finishing book 3, The Witch's Apprentice, there's a scene between Jax and Ma that I started to cry. I had to stop and I got up and I walked around, I sat back down and I wrote some more, and then I was crying a little bit more. So I took another little walk around my apartment and then I finally finished it. But that just means I'm invested, right? And if I'm invested, hopefully the reader will also care and be invested in these characters and the rest of the series and the stories. So I love writing. I don't think I could do it full time for a living if I just liked it.
Yeah, I could see that. It would be quite a chore.
Yeah.
Um, Miss McDaniel's class out of Ithaca, New
Oh,
York. She
hey.
wants she wants to know, every week our class has a wish list Wednesday where we share books that we are currently reading so our classmates can add them to their reading wish list or books that are on our own wish list. If today was Wednesday and you were in our classroom in Ithaca, New York, which book on your wish list would you share?
Oh, wow. That is really challenging for me because I don't read a whole lot of kid lit. I mostly read fantasy fiction for adults. And so I am just about to start a new book by Rivers Solomon called Sorrow Land. And even the cover of it looks really creepy and intriguing. I'm looking forward to that. When I was in the 5th grade, I think like The Secret Garden was a really important book for me, but also Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. So if I had to recommend something, that would be the book probably.
That's a good one. So to we've had so many questions and there's so many more. I know there's so many kids that wish I would have asked you their question, but maybe one day. So we end with a question that I borrow from my friend Mr. Shu. What is a question you wish we would have asked you?
That's really interesting. I wish more people, more kids in particular, would ask me how to become an author because I think it's important to me to sort of demystify the writing process and to let kids know that, when I do a presentation, I talk about agents and editors and getting the thumbs up and the thumbs down and self publishing, how I make my own books. I think it's really important for young people not just to be consumers of books. Like, you don't just need to walk into a library or store and take a book off the shelf. You can actually make your own books. Everyone has a story to tell. And now we have a lot of tools around us that can show us how to make our own books. My friend Maya Gonzalez has a website called WriteNowMakeBooks.com. That's WRITE, writenowmakebooks.com, and it shows kids how to make their own books for free, how to take an idea in your head and then turn it into something you can share with other people. And I think we need to start telling kids that sooner, make them curious about it, have them ask the questions so that they end up on the path, so that one day they will be talking to you and their book will have been selected for the Global Read Aloud. I can't tell you what an honor it is, Pernille. I'm so, so blessed that week after week, I have people on Twitter and social media reaching out and telling me how their students are enjoying the book. And then even when I'm not part of it, they're connecting with each other. So you have really created this global community, and you've curated inclusive books that give every kid a chance to learn about someone who's different and to see themselves in the book. And so thank you so much. It's been really such an honor.
But thank you for being a part of it. We know you're busy, and we honestly just want you to write more books so we can read
I
them.
will.
And so the fact that I saw you on Twitter, I saw you connecting, I know you're giving out virtual visits, now this, like you've given us so much of yourself, and we really appreciate it. And I just, from on behalf of the whole global Read Aloud community, just thank you. Thank you for creating characters like Jackson that once again teach little kids that they can be heroes no matter where they are and no matter what their home situation is. They too can be someone who's powerful and changes the world for good. So we're going to give you back your time, but thank you. And to those of you who are watching, hopefully you have loved the Global Read Aloud. And if you're still doing it, that's totally okay. But I would say that the next great read aloud might just be that book number 2. And then we're all going to keep our eyes peeled for that movie or TV show, because I know I would be one of the first people to jump on the couch or to the movie theater with my own kids to watch it. So we're going to cross our fingers and just send so much love out in the world for that. Thank you so much, Zetta. It was an honor.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Keep reading.